all of you directly, but also for us to ask you all questions. So we're excited about that. I do have a quick announcement. Mohammed Rafa, who was among us, has withdrawn from consideration for the race. The personal family obligations will.
Can't hear you in the back.
Okay. I don't know what to do about that. Yeah. So I guess I'm gonna.
He's gonna fix it.
How about that? Can you hear me now?
No.
Only closing dealers. I tried not to work for Verizon, I swear. Okay, I'll just do my best to sit like this. As I was saying, Mohammed Barak has withdrawn from consideration. He was invited to the forum, but he has since decided to step away from the race. His own personal family obligations feel he's unable to commit the time in advance to the Russian campaign. We do welcome him here and are grateful for his candidacy up to this point. So thanks for that. That does not mean everybody else gets more time. Just so we're clear. I'm just thinking. So I'm going to give a quick overview of the order of questions and how we think the candidates have been told this already, but we're just going to remind people. So we'll have 1 minute introductory statements. Jim, she just unmuted us. I'll just join. So we'll have 1 minute introductory statements from the candidates, and then we will move on to 5 minutes for each person to describe their top 3 priority issues and what and how they propose to address those when they get to DC. We also will then have some questions from me and from the audience. We'll be collecting audience questions, so if you haven't already put your question down, please see the table at the front of the back of the room, front of the room, back of the room for you all. Those will be collected in a little bit. And then finally, we'll have following 2 minute closing statements. The candidates have been given most of the questions except the audience questions, of course, and we'll try to mix up the order of speaking. Okay, is that good? Can you hear me?
Hold it up. Sarah, when you were holding it right here.
Yeah, we took that one. So this one is not on. We don't. Oh. Try again. There. The manageability towards. Okay. So we're going to start with our 1 minute intro. So let's say thank you again to all of you for attending. I'm just going to do a quick housekeeping to remind candidates, campaign staff, and the audience to please silence your cell phones because that would not be helpful. So. And we're gonna, the candidates are gonna have to share microphones, so there's 4 on the table. You guys can just work that out if we can, and we'll make sure hope they work. And we're gonna start with Ms. Bailey and work our way this direction for the first order of statements.
Just still Carl, don't talk to me, Carl. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor to be here with you. Can everyone hear me in the back? Yes. Very good. It's an honor to be here with you this afternoon. I want to thank the committee for the invitation and all the surrounding committees. Thank you for this relevant time to talk with you. I am Supervisor Andrea Bailey, currently running for Congressional District 7, and I am excited about running. I am an inner city kid from St. Louis, Missouri, raised in a 4-generation home by a sharecropper's daughter. And I say that because the sharecropper's daughter taught me how important it is for people to walk to the polls and vote. That's where I learned to register 10,000 people for registration in our community to make sure that a voice was heard in our community. I want you to know that I am a spouse. Time out. Oh, okay, time up. Okay, I'm spouse of a Marine, which taught me how to serve nationally and internationally. I am here today because not only do I want to tell you about me, I want to hear from you about you and what the needs are. Thank you.
The one thing I forgot to mention, I apologize, for the candidates, we will, when you have 10 seconds left, you'll see this time up. And when you have 30 seconds left, we'll try to do that for the longer answers. Please, please, please do try to stick to time. We have a lot of folks to get to and a lot of questions, so I apologize. I should have said that at the top.
I can give my 30 seconds.
I'm not going to do it for the 1 minute. Carl, go ahead. Sorry.
Great. Thank you all for being here today. Is it on?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you all for being here. I always feel like I'm a big advantage when we have events in the rural communities because I'm the only candidate up here that lives in a rural community. I live in Greene County, so it was a much easier drive for me than most of the other people here. So thank you for being here. My name is Carl Bedell. I am an attorney. More importantly, I'm a veteran, and I come from a family lineage of service to this country. My mom served in the Army for 34 years. Since I got out of the Army, I've been working for county and state issues, working on veterans issues and supporting nonprofits. And I finally got fed up with the quality of candidates across the country, excluding Abigail Spanberger, who we are fortunate to have, but the quality of candidates that we're seeing in Washington. I believe that we as Americans deserve better people who maintain integrity and honesty when they get to Washington and care about the people before the politics. Thank you all for being here.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and thank you all for having us this afternoon. My name is Margaret Franklin. I currently sit on the Prince William County Board of Supervisors, and I'm running for the 7th Congressional District. Just a little bit about myself. Grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, came to the DMV area by way of grad school at Howard University, worked on Capitol Hill for 8 years and built the House and the Senate, working on some of these top issues, voting rights, gun safety laws, women's reproductive health, which I'll talk a little bit more about when we get into the substance of the policy. But one thing I tell people that one thing that's important, more important than the experience that I have to run and be and serve in Congress, is how effective that I've been. Served on the Board of Supervisors now in my 2nd term, led the effort to create more affordable housing, created a housing trust fund that we're going to fund at $20 million over the next 4 years, and also led the effort to create a child advocacy center to help victims of child abuse. Thank you, and looking forward to meeting all of you.
Good afternoon, Democrats. I am former Delegate Elizabeth Guzman. Thank you so much for having us here today. I'm a mother of 4 children that I raised in the public school system in Congressional District 7. I'm a public administrator, a social worker. I have an over 20-year career working in local government right here in Virginia. For the last 6 years, I have the honor of my life to represent Prince William County Majority Minority and Fauquier County Red and Rural at the state legislature. I serve as the Vice Chair of the Education Committee in the times where we made the largest investments in public education. I have held multiple leadership positions within the House Democratic Caucus and the Democratic Party of Virginia. I've been recognized as a proven leader and effective legislator for organizations right here from Virginia and also the Washington Post and Richmond Times. What is more important, that I have never compromised my democratic values by taking up the toughest fights. I have won 3 competitive seats, 3 competitive races, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
What a great turnout today.
Yeah.
My name's Cliff Heinzer. I grew up in a working class neighborhood at a time when a 40-hour work week meant you earned a living wage. After graduating from college, I joined the Army and I served as an officer in the infantry and the special forces. As a diplomat abroad, I issued visas to legal immigrants. I countered violent terrorism. I funded addiction treatment. I helped the nation to secure its borders, and I sharpened my negotiating skills. I spent 6 years in Afghanistan and the Middle East. I have served on the executive board of my local NAACP. I've been a union member for 25 years. I've chaired the Stafford County Democrats, and I've knocked on thousands of doors for our candidates.
The time's up sign is a suggestion. Thank you. Ms. Sewell.
You guys hear me?
Yep.
Wonderful. Good afternoon. I am Delegate Brianna. No. How about now?
Very good.
Can you hear me now? Yes. No, it's kind of going in now. I may try another microphone. How about this?
Yeah.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Delegate Brianna Sewell, and just 2 years ago, the 7th Congressional District was the second most expensive race in our nation. Now that this is an open seat, it is exceptionally important that we have a strong Democrat who can keep the seat blue and fight to take back control of the House so we can elect Hakeem Jeffries as our next speaker. I am ready for the job. I was born and raised here in the 7th Congressional District. I'm the daughter of 2 Air Force veterans who are from Selma, Alabama. And as you can imagine, service beyond self has been deeply instilled in me. With that, I have dedicated my career to working at the local, state, and federal levels of government, where I have had the great pleasure of telling the stories of my neighbor, but most importantly, finding solutions to their greatest challenges. With your support, we're going to be able to keep this seat blue, and I look forward to sharing even more about my candidacy for office in the near future. But
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Mary Jo, for putting on this fantastic event. It's a really great turnout. So for those of you that I have not met, my name is Eugene Vimman. I'm a husband, a father, a veteran, an immigrant, and a human rights lawyer, and I'm running to represent you in Congress. The fact that we're all here today is a real testament to motivated Dems, but also reinforces the reason why my dad brought us to this country fleeing an authoritarian regime. This is a unique opportunity in this country to be able to participate, and frankly, in a critical year. This year, we're at a crossroads. This year, we get to decide which direction this country goes. Whether we go down a dark path or whether we continue to improve this country. We have room for improvement, undoubtedly, but we have to take efforts and make great strides. So that's why I served for 25 years, and I look forward to your support. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that we are in a very friendly space, y'all, so please take time to wrap up when you do, but we are going to try to keep to time, and I know that 1 minute is not very much time. Actually, in order to mix it up, we're going to mix up the order of questions and answers. So, Ms. Rooney, you're going to take the first 5 minutes for your priorities.
Okay, thank
you.
Thank you, Sarah, for giving us an opportunity to expand on our priorities if elected. So, I have the honor of serving this community. If I have the honor of serving this community in Congress, my top 3 issues will be defending democracy, restoring reproductive rights, and access to abortion care across the country, and strengthening the infrastructure of the entire region, from our highways to our railroads, from our hospitals to our schools. Before I go into more detail, I want to say that no one is better at knowing about the needs of this community than the folks that live in it. And I've had the privilege of meeting many voters across the 10 counties in this district, whether it's the 4 counties of the Piedmont, the rural counties on the Chesapeake side, Caroline and King George, or it's the 95 corridor. We have a very complex district. We have a rural, suburban, and ex-urban core. And so there are some things that unify our district, and I think those things are values. And we have a number of individual issues that are unique to different issues, different counties. So let me talk a little bit about democracy. As I mentioned in the introduction, we are at a crossroads. When my family fled from a bigoted communist dictatorship, we were fleeing anti-Semitism. I know, my family knows, and over the course of 25 years of service around the world, and even after, spending a lot of time in Ukraine, what it's like to live in areas that are not free. That's why democracy is my overriding interest. Every other priority that we have, whether it's reproductive rights or infrastructure, education, guns, depends on how this election turns out. That's why we must be diligent, we must be motivated, we must get out the vote. I have a 13-year-old daughter. I want to ensure that she has the same rights that her mother enjoyed. I want to ensure that she has the same rights to reproductive health care that her mother enjoyed, that women have fought for generations to preserve. That right is under attack. We saw it when the Roe decision was overturned. We've seen it more recently when IVF was attacked. My niece, Alex, my twin's daughter, was born as a result of IVF. And she is one of the most fantastic people I know. She's my daughter's best friend. I can't imagine how a party that claims to believe in the value of life would not support IVF. And frankly, IVF is not the last stop. Contraception is next. I think we all recognize that. And the last thing I want to talk about is infrastructure. Infrastructure means different things in different parts of the county. In Prince William, Stafford, Spotsylvania, Fredericksburg, it means improving 95, making sure that the improvements are not just to the roadway, but multimodal. I've spoken to a number of local leaders, mayors, folks on council in those different locations that really support this. But out here, it means improving the reservoir in Greene County. I know that's a major issue. It also means rural broadband. It means rural health care. My father-in-law was a rural health care provider for over 40 years. So I understand this area fairly well. I've been married to my wife now for 26 years. We've known each other for 32 years. We've had a number of these conversations. And then schools. I'm a product of public schools. My kids went to public schools in Prince William County, and we have to have safe, high-quality public schools so our kids are prepared for the 21st century. We have to have the infrastructure, the broadband that will support high-paying jobs so kids don't feel like they have to leave the communities they grew up in, the communities that they love, in order to have a high-paying job. That can be supported here. That can be supported in the rural communities. Preserving the beautiful nature of these communities and conservation, but also living here and having high quality, good paying jobs. So we all know the stakes this November, and we all have to come together. Whoever the candidate is that wins this primary, we all need to come together to support that candidate. Any one of these candidates is going to be better than what the Republicans come up with. So, thank you.
Thank you. I am running to build our community and bring people together, and that is why my top 3 priorities are focused on ensuring that we protect abortion rights, making sure that we have access to affordable, quality health care, and making sure that we help families make ends meet. So when we talk about making ends meet for our working families here across the 7th District, oh, I'm sorry, you guys can't see me. Does this make much of a difference? I'm talking about restoring access to the child care tax credit. We know how much of a difference that made for Virginia's families and for families all across our nation. And we have the ability to expand upon that by making it so that individuals who are have children who are 6 years old and older are able to receive $3,000 as a tax credit, and for those who are younger are able to receive $3,600 as far as the tax credit is concerned. As we all know, if you live along that I-95 corridor, that is essentially what you are paying each month utilizing those express lanes to ensure that you have access to child care and you can make it home in a timely fashion. As far as continuing to make sure that families have what they need to make ends meet, we need to ensure that families have access to paid family and medical leave. That has been a push at the federal level, and I'm happy to share that I was part of the reason why we passed that landmark legislation just this year in the General Assembly. At the federal level, we have FMLA, which requires that you have a job to go back to. There is no requirement for compensation, and it's time that no family ever have to face financial uncertainty due to an uncertain health event for themselves, the birth of a child, a mental health matter, a sexual abuse and sexual battery case, or anything of that nature. Life happens, and families shouldn't face financial insecurity for that reason. We also need to expand local food purchase assistance cooperative agreement programs in partnership with USDA. We have so many small farmers all across the 7th District. And as we are working to find ways to feed our children in our public K-12 schools, we have the opportunity to provide assurance to families that no one should go hungry. And as we all know, it's not just a particular group of individuals who are seeking food assistance. When you see and pull up to a food bank, it could be you, it could be your neighbor. The same person who is dropping off food has a neighbor who is going to pick it up. And I also would like to highlight the importance of accessible, affordable healthcare. It is time that we address the Medicare reimbursement. As we try to make Virginia the #1 place for families, and particularly for our seniors to age in place gracefully, we know that this is going to limit healthcare options and access to healthcare. So there are 37 different hospital institutions across the Commonwealth of Virginia. And as we know here in the 7th District, many of those hospitals are not accessible. And we must rely more on mobile van opportunities, such as the mobile vans that I was able to fund through the state government just this past General Assembly session to ensure that mammography van units will be able to meet the needs of the Piedmont region. And going back to protecting abortion rights, as many of you may have watched the State of the Union like myself, you probably noticed that President Biden noted that if we send him a Democratic Congress, we can enshrine the right to a woman's right to choose. And I'm fully in favor. With that said, I appreciate it. Thank you.
The first thing I would seek to do is to enshrine in law a woman's right to choose. And that means passage of the Women's Health Protection Act. It is overdue. We need to make sure that women around the country have equal and assured access to reproductive health. As we've all seen, we look at what happened at craziness in Alabama. We know that this is a battle that we are still in here on. So we have to make sure that we have that law in place to protect women around the country. The second priority that I would seek to move forward on is that we must make sure that the economy works for all. This means bringing the working class back into the middle class. To do this, we're going to have to make sure that we have at least a $15 minimum wage. And it also means that we're going to have to ensure that people who do put in a full work week can earn a living wage. It will mean that we will step back from some of the reverses we've seen to the NLRB. And we make it possible for workers to organize. It also means that we have to have a tax structure that's fair. So a key piece of legislation to support this, or pieces of legislation, will be advancing through the Appropriation Acts the tax proposals that President Biden put forward in the State of the Union address. This means that we will see a fair tax system in which corporations and billionaires pay their fair share. The other things that we can do to help working Americans are make sure that every working American has access to affordable childcare. This is a barrier for so many working couples, and we can fix that now. Among the things, right, that we find that working families have to struggle with is that maybe one partner or the other partner cannot always take the job that they want or work from home if they hope to because of the lack of access to child care. So, the third priority I would have is to move forward with infrastructure. And we need, in particular in this district, transportation infrastructure for communities who are not necessarily in the 95 corridor. We also need communications infrastructure, that means rural broadband. We're going to require some transportation infrastructure here, but we'll also need things like healthcare and also emergency services. Because one of the challenges for rural communities is that while you have the same requirements as many urban communities do, you don't necessarily have the same resource base to provide for them. So we've got to make sure that we have the necessary infrastructure in rural communities so that rural communities can thrive. There's some other priorities, though, that I want to make sure we get. When we talk about rural communities, we have to understand that it's things like barriers just to entry into agriculture. Because for so many would-be young farmers, the cost of acquiring the land and then the capital investment is impossible. And we need to address that and make it possible for young people in these communities to enter into agriculture if they want to. Another area that I think that we need to look at right now is what's happening in the Middle East. And I'm going to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. We were all horrified by the attack on October the 7th. But we know that the path that we're on, the path of the Israeli government, isn't going to lead us to either enduring peace or stability in the region. So, thank you so much, and I'm sure we'll have time to discuss some more issues.
If folks have questions that they would like to be considered to ask the candidates, you should take those cards and pass them to the outside aisles now. They'll be collected. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Well, rather than issues, I would like to address them by subject, and I will start with public education. Well, with public education, one of the things that we have to do is get rid of the unfairness of the public education system that has not helped this area. I will start with more investments in early childhood education. As President Biden mentioned in the State of the Union, he said he supports universal pre-K, and I introduced legislation in Richmond to do just that. The statistics have shown that the earlier they go to school, they'll be more likely to graduate from high school and go to college. We also need to update the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act created by President Obama back in 2012. Mental health is not the same from 2012, it's 2024. So we need to update that so localities and the state get the resources that they need to provide these children with, so they could thrive wherever they need. And we have heard about the composite index and how the funding for public education is calculated. Well, that's obsolete. It was created back in 1970s and it's not helping the localities that live in the Piedmont area. So I am committed to work with the General Assembly to ensure that we change the way that we fund our schools so every child can get access to world-class public education regardless of their zip code. By serving in the General Assembly Education Committee, there are many testing that are required by the federal government. And that's the way that the schools get accreditation, and that's the way that they get funding, based on SOLs mandated by the federal government. Well, we all know that tests are not liked by students, teachers don't like tests, parents don't like tests because it creates a lot of anxiety among our children. So we should be promoting more critical thinking and analytical skills for our children. The second issue that I would like to address is healthcare. And would like to start by addressing how Republicans are trying to attack, as we celebrate the 14th anniversary of Obamacare that has helped more than 700,000 Virginians to get access to health care with pre-existing conditions. It's time that we expand it. The pandemic has shown us the need of universal health care. Health care is a human right, it's not a privilege. I have worked in the human services field. I have seen people dying for not getting access to health insurance. And the reason why the pandemic is still among us is because people don't have health insurance and they go to work even when they are sick. It is time for the United States to join Canada and Mexico and provide health care for everyone. And that doesn't mean that we are gonna get rid of private insurance. You will be able to keep your private insurance if you are able to do so. But we need to make prescriptions as well more affordable. While I was serving in the General Assembly, I introduced a study that created the Board for Drug Affordability. And that is the conversations that we had this year in the General Assembly. So we need to get rid of PBMs. We need to make prescriptions more affordable. It is not okay that a person who is uninsured go to the pharmacy and has to pay 3 times the price that a person that has health insurance. We need to get rid of those disparities. And that includes getting rid of PBMs. They are making money and they are making you buy the medicine that they want because they get reimbursements. On Medicare Advantage, we have seen on the news how Republicans are trying to privatize Medicare. So we need to push back those because that is our money that we invest in the federal government. Finally, as part of healthcare, of course, we need to codify Roe v. Wade in the Constitution so Republicans stop politicizing with our women's reproductive freedom. And I will fight to that because that's personal for my 3 daughters and for the many females that live in the Congressional District 7. Finally, I would like to talk about public safety and infrastructure. Common sense gun reform. Well, we need to start by banning assault weapons. There is no room for any civilian to get access to these weapons of war. We did it. I voted for that while I served in the General Assembly, and we did it again. Virginia has been the leader, and I'm proud that I have introduced and passed legislation that addressed that red flags. I did it on the memory of my constituent, Krista Hamilton, who was killed by her husband, domestic violence abuser. So we are gonna bring what we have done in Virginia and implement it nationwide so we can stop losing lives. And finally, I would like to say that investments in the agricultural industry is a necessity, it's not an option. And we need to help small farmers. Virginia is #1 in the agribusiness among businesses. However, only the big guys are taking advantage of that, and we need to invest in the small farmers so they could continue to grow their products and provide them with the tools so they can export as well. Thank you so much.
Well, first of all, let me just thank many of you here who I've spoken to many times about the priorities that you all have for your next member of Congress. Many of you have heard my story. I talk about growing up in a working families or running on a working families platform and growing up in a single family household where my father actually raised my sister and I after my mother passed away from colon cancer when I was 8. I saw some of the challenges later on, didn't really realize it at the time, that he faced with regards to struggling with healthcare costs even after my mother passed away. So reducing healthcare costs, particularly for vulnerable communities and our senior citizens, is something that's critically important to me. In addition to that, public education, critically important as well, making sure that we can bring federal resources to the locality so that they can increase their resources for their academic programming. We see now what's going on is that we're attacking our teachers, we are banning books, and we're all doing it under the guise of parental rights. But what we need to make sure is that our public education system has the resources they need to simply just teach our kids. I talk to teachers all across this district, and they're just trying to get through math. They're just trying to get through reading. They're just trying to get through English. all these other things that the Republicans have brought in to infiltrate in terms of our education system instead of actually focusing on what's important, is called a distraction. So we need to get back to actually supporting our school systems and bringing those federal resources to the state and making sure that we work with our state to make sure that localities actually get those resources. In addition, public safety is something that's critically important. I currently, again, serve on the Prince William Board of Supervisors. We worked very hard to clean up the Route 1 corridor, and we worked both with law enforcement and our social services department to make sure that it's done, right? We made sure that we offered those in need homeless services. We made sure that we did enforcement actions for bad actors. We made sure that we worked with our apartment complexes and our businesses to make sure that they have the resources, whether it be additional lighting, whether it be gates, or whether it be security cameras, to make sure that they feel comfortable operating in our communities. So when we talk about public safety, we're talking about it at a very grassroots level. And then women's reproductive health. I kind of put that under the guise of protecting democracy. We've seen what the Supreme Court has been doing over the past several years. We saw what they did with voting rights several years ago when they gutted it. We saw what they recently did with affirmative action, and now we see what they're doing with women's reproductive right and Roe v. Wade. What we need to do is make sure that we can take over Democratic majority in the House, make sure that we expand our majority in the Senate, and that we can deliver, again for Joe Biden, a Congress that can actually codify women's reproductive health. And by the way, it goes beyond abortion rights. It also means getting additional access to resources for our families and for our girls and our women and for those that need additional health care support. Last thing I'll just say is a lot of us will have the same priorities, but what it's going to come down to is who can be the most effective in pushing those priorities once they get to Congress. Again, I've worked in both the House and the Senate. I know how to get things done either in the majority and the minority. I've served for members of Congress in both. And it's going to take someone who actually understands the legislative process and understands what's going on the ground. I will tell you that I've worked on healthcare issues locally, led the effort to get funding to create our own healthcare system in Prince William County in the wake of COVID and all the challenges we have with the state. When we talk about public safety, we've worked again on the Route 1 corridor to completely clean it up. And in addition, when we talk about education, our board has presented more money and funding to our education system, billions with a B, more than any other board to our school system. So we've done the work. I've done the work on the local level and would love your support. And let me end by talking about the importance of our rural economies. I've been speaking to different areas within the 7th Congressional District, and what I've learned is what's important in one rural area may not be the same issue in a different rural area. In one county, you may be more interested in protecting farmland and making sure that those farmers have the resources to continue to grow their crops to feed the community. And in another area, broadband and infrastructure may be the top issue in making sure that we can do responsible growing with regards to economic development. All of the members of Congress that I've worked for have served on the Agriculture Committee in both the House and the Senate. So I understand what those federal resources look like coming to these states and localities. You need subsidies for crops. You need to make sure that we have rural water access and making sure that we have technical assistance. And those are the issues that I think that I'm effective at pushing on day one. Thank you.
All right, you're probably going to hear a lot of the same up here. My issue is education, healthcare, and infrastructure. So education, last year in Virginia, 3,600 education jobs went unfulfilled. The Virginia Teachers Union attributes that to the low salaries teachers receive. Now, education is mostly a state and local issue, but there are things that the federal government can and should be doing to incentivize people to become teachers and to stay in the education field once they are teachers. And the first thing that comes to mind is the tax incentive. So currently, teachers can take a tax credit of up to $300 of out-of-pocket expenses for costs that they spend in their classroom. That barely covers the crayons, the Kleenex, and the hand sanitizer that a second-grade teacher would buy for her classroom. We need to pass legislation that amends the tax code so every single out-of-pocket expense is deductible for teachers, and we need to implement a tax credit for any teacher that works a full school calendar year. We also need to look at special education funding. So the IDEA Act, the Individuals with Disability Education Act, is passed, and that can allocate up to 40% of costs for special education students to the states. Currently, the federal government funds that at 16%. There's a long way to go that we could spend more money, send more money to the states for special education. But also, the way that money is allocated, the calculation that the federal government uses gives Virginia an unequal amount of money because we are a more populated state. Currently, a student in Wyoming would get almost $3,600 in federal tax dollars to support their special education needs. In Virginia, that amount is $2,200. That needs to be fixed. We need to make it so it's an equitable amount across all 50 states. Healthcare. If anyone up here didn't get up and said that codifying a woman's right to choose her own health care should not be the number one healthcare priority, they should not be up here. As Democrats, we have to make sure that we correct, that we check the Supreme Court and overturn what they did in Dobbs and restore women's health care rights. Number one priority. The second thing we have to do is get control of our healthcare system. In the United States, $4.5 trillion is spent annually on healthcare. To put that in perspective, Japan is the third largest economy in the world. Their gross domestic product, their entire economy is $4.2 trillion. We spend more on healthcare in the United States than any other country's economy in the world, with the exception of China. And we do not have the healthcare system that we deserve. We've got to fix that, and the first thing we have to fix is accessibility and cost of healthcare. We have to move from a fee-for-service model, which really pushes profits, to a value-based system that pushes quality of care and health. We have to make it so our healthcare system does not focus on profit, but focuses on the health of American citizens. We have to look at that to regulate the insurance companies and regulate big pharma. Currently, there's 20 name brand drugs that Americans pay 2 to 4 times more than our neighbors in Canada or Europeans for the same drug. That is absolutely unacceptable. We need to change that. We also need to look at innovation. We need to incentivize innovation in healthcare. In the rural communities, currently, almost 3 out of every 10 hospitals are at risk of closing. And what that means is we have to be able to have access to telehealth, and we need to incentivize innovation for wearable technology that allows people at home to wear bracelets, watches, rings, something like that can monitor health status, can report that to doctors, and help facilitate triaging and addressing healthcare issues. But to do that, we need infrastructure. We need broadband in rural communities. It blows my mind that it took 9 years from JFK standing up and saying we will put a man on the moon to Neil Armstrong taking that small step. But we're in a state that 40 years ago invented the internet, and we still can't get broadband down a dirt road in a rural county. That's unacceptable. The American Society of Civil Engineers puts out a grade card every year for states' infrastructure. Virginia recently received a C. I don't like mediocrity, and that is certainly mediocrity. Virginia's roads, Virginia's roads, transit, and rail received a C-. We have to have more money at the federal level invested in infrastructure. The federal government is doing a good job of that the last few years, but we have to do more. And when we get that money down to the state levels, we need to incentivize and put teeth in those bills so the state doesn't sit on the money, they spend it, and they improve our infrastructure. Thank you.
I'm gonna be there in the next round, y'all, so be ready.
You're always talking when it's my turn.
No,
Sarah, I'm just kidding. So let me start by saying, when I was introducing myself, I talked about being the descendant of a sharecropper's daughter. And what that meant to me, and I'm gonna get to my platform through this story, what that meant to me is I watched my grandmother walk neighbors to the voting booth to vote when she couldn't vote when she came from Macon, Mississippi. And so it's unconscionable to me that we are still dealing with having the voters' right bill stopped, the John Lewis voting rights bill stopped, and not giving people access and equal access to their voting rights, their God-given rights. That is unconscionable to me. And so that's one of my platforms, to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. And these unnecessary stoppages and suppression of voting is just done with. We are a country of freedom, and our voices need to be heard to make sure that our country is free. So that's very important to me. The other thing that I mentioned was about, I didn't get this part out, but my mom is a retired nurse. And I watched my mom, as a nurse with her education, serve people at different levels in different environments. And for me to say that we don't have continual, consistent, affordable health care, accessible health care, it's just unconscionable. Doesn't make sense to me. And what doesn't make sense to me is that we don't band together as a unit, a legislative unit, to help President Biden and Vice President Harris to make sure that that is continually happening for our country. It is so very important. The other thing that I want to talk about is mental health. I know my colleague mentioned about mental health, but I am the champion in our county for mental health. And what that looks like to you, from what I've done, is bringing together 93 stakeholders along with our federal, state, and local entities to make sure that we brought back home $16 million for a brand new mental health facility. That's important because mental health has been swept under the rug for so long and ignored. But out of COVID came minds that needed to be healed across the board, across our nation. And my thought is, and my leadership is, when you heal minds, you heal the land. Because you can't go to the voting booth if you're mentally ill. You can't go and get affordable health if you don't know how to express that. So mental health is very, very important to me. And then the other thing that I want to bring to your attention that's very important to me is saving our democracy. Now, I made that last, but that really is my first one. That's why I want to go to Washington and represent you, to save our democracy. I've worked with Abigail Spanberger. I've worked with Senator Keynes and Warner and Connolly. And I've even worked with Congressman Whitman when we were working on the mental health piece. But I know how to work from a leadership perspective in a bipartisan way to get the job done. You deserve a representative like Abigail Spanberger to get the job done. I'm intentional. I have respect and integrity to represent you. That's important to me. You want a representative that has those kinds of values, those kinds of democratic values to preserve your environment. Now, let's talk about the real areas. I agree that we're running against each other. I agree with my buddy here. It doesn't make sense for you to have to continually fight for broadband. I worked with Senator Warner to get broadband in our county. Can you hear me? Yeah. In our county. And it was like the Twilight Zone. It really was. But Senator Warner says, Andrea, we got to do this. So why hasn't it moved all the way? Because it's continuity of government. It's important. I've talked to Abigail Spanberger about what is needed in the rural areas. And her focus, being on the Agriculture Committee, is to make sure that everybody in the region is served. And that's very key. Continuity of government is very key in this area, as well as having a leader that's intentional about serving. I got 30 seconds. So, as your representative, I bring to you my leadership of working in corporate America. I understand business. I bring to you my leadership of being on the county board, of understanding what it means to write policy and legislation, to change things in the environment. And so that's why those 4 platforms are so important in this region as we go forward. Thank you.